Welcome back to Weems Motor Co. Stick around and find out what this big chunk of metal has to do with our Born Free 16 build. Hang out. Alright folks, so we are back to work on Ultor, our Born Free 16 build. Ultor stands for the Punisher in Latin. But this motorcycle, we're to the point where we've got that front end. If you watched the last video, we got that front end pretty close to done. So I don't want to show my hand on what's underneath that blanket. So we got it covered up. If you guys want to see more on that, watch that last video or stick around for this build series. You're going to see all of it happen right here at the shop. But today we are moving to the rear section of the motorcycle, which means that we need to get a gearbox in there to figure out our spacing for the rear wheel. Speaking of the rear wheel, check this out. Around 1949, BSA, which stands for Birmingham Small Arms, they built guns and motorcycles. You can see some of their other videos on them on our channel, but they designed this rear wheel hub setup that was titled a quick detachable. Really cool system, as the brake plate and all of the internals remained attached to the frame, but yet you were able to remove the rear wheel without detaching the chain and all of those other things. Really cool option that BSA offered, and Triumph actually offered it for a few years also, just a little bit different design. But I've always loved a couple of the components about these quick detachable hubs and brake setups. Number one being, yes, you can remove the rear wheel without taking all that stuff off. The secondary thing was, on the earlier ones, they had these flutes, these vents here that act as cooling fins on it, but also the design of that hub, how it has that crinkle finish around it. Just always thought those were really cool looking. The Triumph ones were more plain and just didn't have the same stylistic look that we're looking for Ultor. So I said, how cool would it be to take one of these BSA quick detachable hubs that came out around 1949 and adapt it to work on this Triumph frame. So that's what we're doing today. We're gonna get this hub set up into the frame and get a gearbox in there to make sure that our chain is lining up so that we can make proper spacers, and that's where that big hunk of metal comes into play. So first thing we need to do is to get this mounted into the frame to figure out our alignment. So let's grab a gearbox. All right, so we are able to grab up a Triumph pre-unit rigid housing. Pretty nice shape. Maybe one or two little repairs, but it's great. So we went ahead and threw sprocket on there with the bearing so that we can get this into that frame with all of the new hardware. And then we can work our way back to that rear sprocket to make sure everything is in line. So let's throw this into the frame. So got the gearbox in there nice and tight. We can start working our way back to that rear wheel. Now, this particular drum that is set up for the BSA quick detachable has essentially a half axle. So it comes out the side that would mount into the frame, and then the back side of it has a threaded hole where you would put your axle from the opposite side and screw into this so that that wheel can move over and get out. So now we simply just need to put the brake plate on here. Got a little spacer and then an axle nut that goes on the outside, and we can mount this up into the frame and see what our alignment is. Fingers crossed that it'll just be a mount on thing, that chain will be dead straight. So let's get this into the frame. All right, got her all mounted up there. Now I've taken a couple of these bolts that attach the rear sprocket on and removed those so that we can put a straight edge against that sprocket and run it up to the front sprocket to make sure that our alignment is perfectly straight. Now you could take a chain and throw it on there and kind of get it close, but nothing beats a straight edge. When that straight edge goes on there, you know that it is absolutely perfect. So let's go grab a straight edge, put it on that rear sprocket, and see how it lines up to that front sprocket. Well, wouldn't you know it, it lines up just right. Now, I always like to double check. I have this piece of channel that I have held onto for years, nice straight edge, but it's actually the width of a chain, so I could lay it across that rear sprocket and see if it lines up to that front sprocket. So let's see if we can do it. Absolutely perfect. Man, that takes a lot of time away from trying to get this thing set up right. So now what we need to do is to find the rear wheel that we're going to use and put it up in there and get that measurement from the opposite side of the wheel over to the front, to the frame. But before we do that, let's talk about how that other side looks. All right, so let's take a closer look at this hub. Now, obviously, the side with the splines on it goes towards our brake plate and holds that nice and tight. Now, on the opposite side, the side that goes towards the other side of the frame, you're going to notice that there are some threads on the outside diameter of this inner sleeve. Now, what those threads were for was this little cup device that has these two little grooves on the outside. Now these two little grooves, this screws on right there just like that, and these two grooves is what controlled the speedometer drive. Now this is a show bike, we're not running a speedo on this thing, and I thought this looks kind of bulky and not cool. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna get away from this, and that plate that went around the outside diameter that took away the cool look of all of this, we're gonna get rid of those two items, and we're gonna take that piece of metal that is back here, this heavy chunk of steel, and we're gonna make our own spacer that will look cool and look the part of this bike. Just so happen I have right here that axle that sits and goes through. And eventually we're gonna take and make a custom axle because, you know, we're not going stock on this thing. We want to make something that's cool. So we're going to use this as a template to make the new one. So we got all the pieces and parts, all the spacers that schematic showed. So now we need to get that hub into a wheel. And it just so happens I have already done that, and we can get that wheel with the tire mounted on it over to the frame and get it mounted up in there. So let's go grab that wheel. And here we have one rear wheel with that BSA hub laced up to it. Now, you're asking yourself, why do you have it wrapped in plastic? Well, like we said in our other video, we don't want to show our hand. We don't want everyone out there building Born Free bikes to see what we got going on with this motorcycle. So I said, let's wrap this up and we can keep it under wraps until the appropriate time to unveil. So, got a cool tire on there, got it mounted up, got the spokes in there. Now these are not trued or tightened, they're just there to get this correct spacing for this rear axle because we are going to disassemble this whole wheel and do all the finishing stuff. So this is just for mock-up. So let's go ahead and get this thing up there, throw it onto that quick detachable brake drum, and we can figure out what spacing we need to get this thing all together. Let's get it on the bike. All right, so we got the axle in there, threw a couple spacers in there just to get that right measurement, so we can go ahead and pull those spacers out and get that measurement that we need to turn that big hunking piece of steel into something cool. Got to do up some drawings, make sure that all of our measurements are just right and proper, and then we could head to the lathe and start making this cool. So let's take the axle back out and figure out what the distances are and grab a piece of paper and start drawing something cool. Let's make it happen. Got that wheel spacer all done. Went ahead and added the ribbed sections to simulate those vents that are on the brake drum. So looks super cool. Everything measures out and specs correctly. Last thing to do is to get this onto the frame and wrap up this video. Let's knock it out. And just like that, we have one super sweet wheel spacer and rear wheel mounted up onto Ultor, our Born Free 16 build. Super stoked about it. We still got tons of work to do, a lot of things to fabricate, and you guys are gonna be right here along the whole journey watching us build a show bike that is guaranteed to blow some people's minds. With that, we're gonna wrap up today's video. If you are new around here, jump down and hit that subscribe button. If you really like the video, hit that thumbs up, turn those notifications on, and let everyone know what's going on right here at Weems Motor Co. Peace.